Hi everyone, welcome back to the next video in my Dominion tutorial series. In this video, we're going to talk about a list of terms that people will use when referring to Dominion, and I want to make sure their definitions are clear and provide some examples so that it's easier to talk about certain things that are important concepts in Dominion. The first of those terms is called cantrip. Any card is a cantrip if it gives at least one card and one action when it's played. And the reason this is important is because when you've got a cantrip in your deck, such as Great Hall, that does nothing other than give you a point, but is a cantrip because of the card in the action. You've got a card like Great Hall, it's important to know that by putting it in the deck, you won't be hurting yourself. And the reason for that is, right now I've got a 5-card hand, and if I play a Great Hall, it replaces the action it took in order to play it. It also replaces the card slot that it took up in my hand when I initially drew it. So when I play the Great Hall, I've still got one action left, and I've still got 5 cards in my hand. It's important to know if a card is a cantrip because getting cantrips in your deck will usually never hurt you. And usually the cost of getting a cantrip is the opportunity. Well, I had $3. Am I better off getting this 1 point that doesn't really hurt my deck? Or would I rather just have a silver? Will that be better for me? The next few terms are related to the number of actions that action cards played will give you. So a terminal action is any action card that doesn't replace the action that it took to get it. And usually, a terminal action will be the last action, or sometimes the only action you'll play on your turn. A non-terminal action is again any card that gives you plus action, which means it's not the last card or the terminal card that you'll be playing this turn, unless you want it to be. Villages are a term that a lot of people use to group all of the cards that give you 2 or more actions together. So yes, there is a card called Village that we might remember. The Village gives you 2 actions in 1 card. You'll notice that the Village is also a cantrip because it gave us a card and an action. The additional benefit it gave us was a second action to play. But if I'm referring to the card Village, of course I mean that particular card, but if I'm talking about villages in general, I'm talking about cards that give you at least plus 2 actions. And those cards are important because without any villages in the kingdom, I'll never be able to play more than 1 terminal action on a turn. So when you're planning what you want to do with your deck, that's usually something to keep in mind. Another example of a village might be Festival. Festival is not a cantrip because it doesn't give you a card. It gives you the 2 actions, but instead of other benefits, it gives you $2 and a buy. The next term is terminal draw. So, terminal is in the word, which means it doesn't give you plus actions. And draw, we're using to refer to the fact that it gives you a card from your deck. So, terminal draw cards are cards that give you plus cards without giving you plus actions. For example, well, there was Smithy that we knew before, but remember Council Room. Gives you a bunch of cards, but it doesn't give you another action. This is something to keep in mind because, well, if you're going to draw cards from your deck and you don't have another action left to play them, then if you draw action cards, that's not a good thing. So if you're going to build a deck around terminal draw, what you really want to be drawing is treasures, because you can play the treasures once you've drawn them. Now, if you have spare actions, that's great. It doesn't matter if you draw actions. And that sort of goes into the next few terms. So a dead card is a card in your hand that provides you no benefit, and usually victory point cards are dead cards, because the only benefit they give you to that hand is the fact, well, there is no benefit. The only benefit they give you at all is scoring you points at the end of the game. But another example of a dead card is an action that you can't play. So, if you drew an action with your Council Room that you can't play, it's considered a dead card. It's doing you just as much good as a victory point card or even a curse. So there's this term called dead draw, which is usually terminal draw, but you draw a card into your hand and it's no good to you. So of course if you draw a victory point card into your hand, it's not good to you this turn, but yeah, you didn't get it next turn, so it's better than a poke in the eye, right? But if we played a council room, drew some action cards into our hand, which I'm going to do now. All these great halls certainly don't hurt me now, but I play this council room and I drew 2 great halls. Well, these great halls are no good to me now. Normally cantrips are great, but if you dead draw them, well, maybe I should have planned this out a little better. If these had been silvers, I'd have a ton of money that I could spend this turn. So, usually dead draw happens when it's the last action of my turn. So that's a distinction between the dead draw and that terminal draw that we were avoiding. Terminal draw is a thing, but if I have spare actions, it's not a bad thing. Dead draw is when I'm using the last action of my turn to draw more cards. So if you think you might not be drawing treasure cards, dead draw is usually a bad idea. So now that we've talked about draw, let's just define another way that people talk about draw. So sometimes people will say there's no draw on the board. And when they say this, they're talking about a method of increasing your hand size. We want a card that when we're done playing it will give us more than 5 cards in our hand, or more than 4 cards if we started with 4 or 6 or whatever. So usually these cards give you +2 cards or more. So Council Room gives us 4 cards. That increases our hand size. Great. Library draws us up to 7. Well, if you had less than 7 before, that increased our hand size, so it's draw. Witch, +2 cards. That increases hand size. But the Great Hall only gives us 1 card. Even though it draws cards from your deck, we don't consider it a draw card because, well, we didn't have any more cards after playing it than we did before we played it. A lot of times when you want to do something fancy on the board, it's a lot easier to make that happen when you can have more than 5 cards in your hand at any given point in time. Makes it easier for you to combine actions you want to play together, or it makes it easier for you to just have bigger turns than you would with just a 5-card hand. So it's an important concept. Another concept that I've sort of given a name to, and I don't know if this is universally accepted, but strong and weak trashing. When we know what trashing is, strong or weak trashing refers to the speed at which cards can trash things. So I'll define strong trashing as any card that can remove 2 or more bad cards from your deck when played once. Now, bad cards is not well defined because depending on the kingdom, certain cards may be bad, certain cards may be good. For example, Copper was a good example. Depending on if certain types of victory point cards are available, maybe Copper's a good card, maybe Copper's a bad card. If the deck I'm building doesn't want Coppers in it, then a card that can remove 2 Coppers at once could be strong trashing. Otherwise, no. Weak trashing is just the complement of that. Any card that can't do that when played once. So Chapel can remove 4 cards from my deck. That makes it strong trashing, and in fact Chapel is the strongest or the fastest trashing that's available in the game. It's cheap so you can get it early, and you can trash 4 cards, which is more than most other trashing cards can do when played just once. Masquerade, for example, says at the end, then you may trash a card from your hand. It can only trash 1 card every time you play it. Of course there's no restriction on it, but Masquerade is considered weak trashing for that reason. Well, that's all for this video. Hopefully you've gotten familiar with some of the terms, and if there are things that aren't clear, well, comment on the video and I'll clear it up. Thanks for watching.